Today's episode of Vital Voices is brought to you by Oaktree Medical Center and Wellspring Lifestyle Group.
Are you enjoying Vital Voices? Do you find our conversations educational, engaging, and inspiring? Then like, subscribe, and tap that notification bell to keep updated on new episodes and more.
Vital Voices.
Welcome to Vital Voices, the podcast where we amplify the stories, insights, and expertise of the people shaping the future of our communities, our conversations, and our country. I'm your host, Alexis Burrows. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're exploring eating for hormonal health with Registered Dietitian and Nutritionist Shanishka Cambridge, who is also the Dietitian Director at Oaktree Medical Center. We'll dig into how diet shapes hormone balance, key differences between men and women, the best and worst foods for reproductive and metabolic health, everyday endocrine disruptors, and the roles of stress, sleep, hydration, meal timing, and portions. And as always, we'll keep it practical with simple swaps you can start with this week. So let's get into it. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Mr. Burrows, for inviting me again.
So we are excited to talk about this topic. It's an interesting one. We had Dr. Carmen Cartwright on the show a while back, and she was talking about the differences between hormone health for men and women. And one of the things that kind of stuck out as, we were working in the background after that was, where does nutrition and diet play as it pertains to your hormonal health? And so that, we have to get back to getting you on the show to kind of talk through this topic. And so that's how, we got here today to kind of get, the nutritionist's take on how we should approach eating when it comes to our hormonal health, because we know hormones control a lot of how our body works and functions. So it's an important thing for us to speak to our listeners and our audience about. So welcome back to the show, and we're happy to have you on. So let's start out, kind of at the ground floor. We hear people talk about hormones and hormone balance and hormonal health all the time. Which hormones are most responsive to how we eat what we eat?
Thank you for that question. So when we think about hormones, first we need to understand what they are. So these are chemical messengers that tell our bodies to do particular things. These instructions may have to do with our growth, our development, metabolism, reproduction. And so when we talk about hormonal health, we're really referring to, do we have the right levels of hormones at the right times and functioning in the right way? And some of the hormones that can be impacted by our diet and lifestyle includes things such as insulin, cortisol, thyroid, and our sex hormones, estrogen and testosterone.
Okay. So from a mechanical standpoint, how does diet change hormone composition, or signals? Because you said it's a messenger, so I imagine our diet may have something to do with how those messages get transported from one part of the body to the next. So how does that work?
Good question. One thing we haven't really heard much about is something called the gut hormone axis. So what am I talking about? When we think about hormones and diet, we need to start in our intestines. We've heard about probiotics. Persons want to take probiotics, but why? Probiotics contain good bacteria, lactobacillus, bifidobacterium. And what we don't know is that if the balance of these hormones are off, it will impact. If the balance of these bacteria are off, it will impact our hormones. And these hormones are important because they improve digestion, immune system, prevent infection, mental health. But as it relates to hormones, they actually signal the body to do certain things. So for example, if we have good bacteria in our gut, we will produce the hormone GLP-1. For persons who know anything about GLP-1, it is something that is being mimicked by these medications like Ozempic and Wegovy, because it helps to stimulate insulin secretion. So at a later time, I'm going to come back and let's talk about how does diet influence GLP-1 and its role with appetite control. So back to what I was saying, if we have good health, good bacteria, then our intestines can produce hormones such as GLP-1, hormones such as CCK, which helps with satiety and digestion, that helps with ensuring that we don't overeat. We want to lose weight all the time. These are hormones we don't talk about. We don't talk about hormones such as ghrelin and leptin. If our ghrelin levels are high, we want to eat more food. If our leptin levels are low, we want to eat more food. And these are all hormones. Now, estrogen, testosterone, I'll briefly mention this here. We don't realize that the good bacteria is actually influencing how the body will interpret and utilize the estrogens. For example, did we know that the good bacteria in our intestines help to break down estrogen or compounds that act as estrogen, so that when they are released into the system, they can be used. So for persons who don't have good healthy gut because they're not eating a healthy diet or they have too much stress, it will impact their hormones from the table.
That's interesting. I always laugh at the ghrelin one because I remember I think my wife was telling our daughter at one point, she's like, she referred to it as the gremlin, because like when your tummy grumbles, it's because of the ghrelin and that sort of thing. So I always laugh at that one. But it is interesting to see how gut health kind of ties into this, because we hear about probiotics, prebiotics, all of these different things that people talk about. But I'm not sure if we have a full understanding of how that mechanism works in terms of how that plays into all of the different hormones that go on in our body, not just the ones in our gut. So it'll be interesting to see when we kind of come back to that a little bit later. So, for someone who may be listening and they feel like, or maybe they've been told that, their hormones are imbalanced or they're having some issues, what are some of the early signs or symptoms that might suggest that their diet is a part of the problem with their hormonal health?
Okay, when we talk about signs and symptoms relating to hormonal health, first I want to say that early signs or symptoms of hormonal health or imbalance may not be diet related. We may not be able to decipher, okay, the diet is causing this particular symptom, but what we could start this conversation with is identifying what some of those symptoms could be in general. So some symptoms of hormonal imbalance could be a skin problem. Maybe a person has persistent acne. This is an indication of some hormonal concerns or imbalances, maybe due to a fluctuation in hormones such as estrogen and testosterone. There may be some increased inflammation. So how would diet affect that? If our diet is inflammatory, if we're consuming foods that are producing lots of inflammation or foods that are not feeding the good bacteria, then this will contribute to the skin problems. Another symptom may be mood swings or irritability. And one of the ways that diet can be impacting that, if that is the cause or a part of it, is if we have fluctuations in our blood sugar levels. We know that blood sugar is being produced from the foods and the things that we're drinking, and so we're eating or drinking things that are not allowing the blood sugar to remain balanced and steady. This will impact our hormones that affect our mood. Another symptom or early sign that could be diet related or not, that may indicate a hormonal problem, would be sleep disturbances. We all need to get a good night's sleep. We say maybe 8 to 10 hours, 7 hours, maybe more for younger children. But our diet can impact our sleep. For example, if we are eating late, that can impact our sleep. If we are not eating sufficient nutrients like magnesium and zinc and the B vitamins, if we're not getting enough melatonin. People are taking melatonin tablets or supplements, but we can get melatonin from foods like nuts and mushrooms and cherries. Another symptom that may be present if we have a hormonal imbalance would be changes in body composition, gaining too much weight. And finally, I would say PCOS. If you are seeing that you're having facial hair as a female, more acne, thinning hair, or insulin resistance as a female, that could be a hormonal imbalance, and our diet could be influencing that, whether we're eating too much trans fats, saturated fats, or too much simple carbohydrates and sugars.
Wow. You mentioned PCOS, which obviously is more of an issue for women, which kind of is a natural segue into the next segment of our conversation. We actually did 2 completely different episodes with Dr. Cartwright on men's hormonal health versus women's hormonal health. And it was interesting because obviously while we do have a lot of similar hormones, we do have some that are particularly different and operate and provide different functions between men and women. So in the same vein, do men and women differ in how their diet influences hormones? And if so, what are the biggest differences?
When we think about diet and how it can impact hormones for men and women, there are similarities and there are differences. So from a similarity point of view, all all people, men and women, we have insulin, GLP-1, ghrelin, etc. But the differences primarily what we speak about when it comes to this topic is when we think about male health is testosterone. These days, you find more men are being tested for their testosterone levels. Testosterone is a male sex hormone. It's important for the development of the male reproductive organs, their prostate, their testes. It's influencing their production of facial hair. They get a deeper voice. They have a greater muscle mass because of a higher level of testosterone. But in this conversation, we don't often think about the diet. And so where excessive alcohol may be promoting something else in a female, and for a man, it may actually be contributing to a low testosterone level. So for men who are consuming excessive amounts of alcohol, if their diets are very high in fat, trans fats, saturated fats, fried foods, if their diets are very high in refined carbohydrates, foods that are high on the glycemic index, these can cause challenges where the body is unable to produce sufficient testosterone, or is damaging it, and there's low testosterone. And so we want to look at how we can improve that, do the opposite, moderate the fat content, consume foods that are low on the glycemic index, don't abuse alcohol, and ensure to include foods that are going to be good sources of zinc, which is going to be important for testosterone production. We can find zinc things like pumpkin seeds, nuts, our protein sources. Also, healthy fats are good for testosterone health. Omega-3 unsaturated fats like in nuts and avocados, and these are some examples. On the flip side, for women, when we think about reproductive health for women, there are a few scenarios that we must consider, like their menstrual cycle. So we're talking about a woman who is not in menopause yet, who goes through a menstrual cycle, a woman who is ovulating, a woman who has the ability to have children and be fertile. Nutritional deficiencies can impact all of those things that I would have just mentioned. And I'll give you an example. If we are eating a diet that's promoting insulin resistance, then we will have more issues with our fertility. We'll have more issues with our cycle. If we're eating or consuming too much caffeine or alcohol, this can disrupt the way our estrogen is operating in our body. And too much fats and carbohydrates, all these things can impact fertility. So though the diet habits may be similar for men and women, they're having a different impact because of their gender.
Oh wow, that's interesting. The I guess the connection between the diet and the insulin resistance, and then that connection to fertility, and I guess fertility challenges. Because again, I think sometimes people don't. We often just say, eat right and exercise with this as a blanket statement, without necessarily considering all of what comes out of that and how it actually affects specific areas of our life, like things like fertility, and for people in that particular space. So, kind of, I guess, zoning in on the female side of it a little bit more, there's also a lot of difference between adolescence, puberty, fertility, during pregnancy, and, premenopause, menopause. What shifts nutritionally should women make as they go through those different stages? Like, are there any specific things where it's like you should, have more of this particular vitamin or nutrient or this particular type of food as you go from one stage of life to the next?
Okay, so we talk about the female life stages. Female starts as a baby, a girl, a child, and we're getting to the teen age. So when we're approaching adolescence, and something that is relevant is puberty, when the female is beginning to develop the female reproductive organs, their breasts, the more development of their ovaries. There's growth in those particular areas, and so they're going to require additional protein. So protein is going to be important, as well as additional calories and calcium and vitamin D and iron. But the thing about it is, in our culture, we're eating so much processed foods that are very energy dense. So we don't really have an issue with the extra calories. We don't necessarily have an issue with the protein, but where we may have an issue is getting adequate calcium and vitamin D and iron. And so it's important for a teen female who is developing to ensure that she gets adequate amounts of those things. And why? Those nutrients are important, for example, calcium and vitamin D, because we want the young teen female to begin developing strong bones, because what is lacking at the teen years is going to show up in the adult years and increase your risk of osteoporosis. So when we come to calcium, we know drink milk, blah, 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 blah. But some other foods that contain calcium would be things like dark green leafy vegetables. So kale, broccoli, also nuts like almonds have calcium as well. And iron, luckily we can get iron from iron fortified foods, like we're eating cream of wheat. And iron is an animal protein. It's also in beans and nuts and seeds. So those things are important to illustrate. And I would just say here for female, we want to ensure that they're getting adequate iron, because a female teen will begin menstruating and we don't want to end up with deficiencies. Right. So when we talk now about pregnancy, a woman who wants to become pregnant or is able to become pregnant, and then who wants to breastfeed in the postpartum phase of her life stages, we want to think about particular nutrients, and one of those things would be folic acid. Folic acid is important for the nervous system development for the child. If there's lacking of folic acid or folate, it can cause issues in nerve health and nervous system, their brain function, their spine development. And it's easy to get the folate if we're taking our prenatal supplements. If we are eating fortified foods, for example, again, they fortify the cream of wheat, they're fortifying the bread, they're fortifying common foods that we eat, because we know that sometimes females in this life stage can be lacking in that. We also want to make sure that during that stage you get enough choline. Choline is another micronutrient. It's found in mushrooms and cruciferous vegetables, beans, nuts, grains, and other protein sources. It's good for the brain development of the baby. We want our babies to be smart. Of course, protein is going to be important, healthy fat, and iron, as stated before. And when we're getting down into the perimenopause and the menopause, things are changing. Our hormones are changing. Women will begin to see their menstruation cycle decrease in length. Eventually it will stop, and so it's going to have an impact on our hormones such as estrogen, and these hormones can shift in such a way where it can increase the risk of bone loss. And so we want to put more emphasis on things to strengthen our bones. And sometimes people don't think about protein, but protein is important for bone health in addition to calcium and vitamin D. And so these things are important. And finally, I'll bring it up again. Insulin resistance is important for all of these stages, but particularly as we get older in the perimenopause and menopause, we see more persons in general developing insulin resistant conditions like type 2 diabetes. And so during this time we want to make sure we pay attention to things like caffeine and alcohol, in addition to simple carbohydrates and sugars.
Yeah, it's interesting when you mentioned the part about pregnancy and doing like prenatals. I remember when my wife was pregnant and we were looking for the prenatal vitamins. She's like, make sure it's the one that has folate, because apparently not all of them have folate in it. And then it's also funny when you mention the fortified. It's like, I know I've seen like fortified on like the bread and the cream of wheat before, but I never realized that it was like iron fortified. Like it never clicked to me that that's what the fortified was, or that's what it meant. So it's funny how you see these things, but you don't necessarily take stock of what that actually means, and things that we may see in our everyday life. So let's look at the flip side. Let's look at men. Similarly, men go through adolescence. We talked about this with Dr. Cartwright, andropause, which was news to me. But it's like, they have different stages as well. What dietary priorities best support testosterone and metabolic health in men as they go through the different stages of life?
So for a teen male who's in the adolescent life stage, we want to focus on zinc. Zinc is going to be important because at this time the male teen is developing their male reproductive organs, and zinc is needed. Zinc is a mineral. It's needed, for example, for testosterone production. And so foods that are very good sources of these are going to be pumpkin seeds, nuts. Your protein sources are going to be important. So if you have a young boy who's not a teen yet, I would suggest that you would help him to have more variety in his diet. Not just focus on meat, but get some of the plant sources of zinc as well. Protein also becomes important. Protein, as testosterone will increase, it will produce more help with production of more muscle. So protein is important, and balancing their carbohydrates for growth. Not too much calories, but adequate to maintain good height and growth and development. When we talk about men who is getting older in the adult years, nutrients are going to be important. It's going to look at the heart healthy fats. Men tend to have more challenges with things like heart disease, and so we want to be making sure they're not getting too much like trans fat and saturated fats, getting enough fiber, enough micronutrients for energy and hormone balance. They still have testosterone, so the same principles will apply. So when we think now about andropause and there might be some challenges with the testosterone, we want to make sure then that we're really paying attention to diet quality. So not too much alcohol, not too much foods that are high in refined carbohydrates, not too much foods that are fried and high in fat, but we want to balance that, ensuring that we're getting adequate protein, get our zinc, our vitamin D, omega-3 fats, and incorporate things that are not diet related, like strength training, building our muscles. We don't want to neglect the fact that we do need to build muscles while we're building a healthy plate.
Understood. I guess across the board for teens and young adults, what nutrition basics protect hormonal development? Because obviously this is a stage where everything is starting to kick into high gear, your body is changing. What are some basics that both, teen men and women should know? Or I guess, for that matter, parents should know for their teens?
So you want to make it simple because there's so much things happening with teens and young adults. The perspective and the focus are on different things that are of importance to them. And
Right.
and the reality is that nutrition isn't always important. So if you as a parent wanting to give advice and you have a laundry list of all kind of things to do and you want to get their attention, you might lose them. So some basic things, don't skip breakfast. Why is this important? It's important because if the teens and young adults skip breakfast, they're going to be more likely to reach for the sugar sweetened beverages, to reach for the foods that are going to be high in fat, which is going to impact negatively their hormonal health. So just encouraging them to eat breakfast will help to reduce those dietary factors that will impair the function of hormones. Also ensuring that they're eating a balanced diet, getting enough protein. We grew up, sometimes we say a belly full is a belly full, even if that means bread and tea. But bread and tea is missing some components, is missing the vegetables, is missing the protein, and protein is important for hormonal health. So letting them know, making sure I get a source of protein at all of their meals. Also encouraging them to eat colorful foods, getting all the colors, reds and the purples and the greens and the yellows. And you can let them know, okay, taste the rainbow, not just Skittles, but let's taste some of these colorful vegetables and fruits. And it might be a simple message, but it'll help them to get what they need. And those types of things are important, especially reducing ultra-processed snacks. There's so much information is coming about ultra-processed food, foods that look very different from the original. If we get those basic tips, we can actually help to set them up for a better health and better hormonal health long term.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like, when you consider the Bible says everything in moderation, and you think about it, people talk about the colorful plate, right? So the idea is you're getting a lot of diversity in what you're eating when you get all of the different colors on your plate. And please, for God's sakes, don't eat the Skittles. That's not even remotely anything near food. Please don't put Skittles in your body. So let's go a little bit deeper into reproductive health. One of the things that, especially for women, I imagine when they think about how their hormones impact their menstrual cycle, in terms of whether that's excess bleeding, PCOS, thyroid development, things like that, having a regular cycle, what foods or nutrients best support female reproductive health? So making sure that these things that the body's working at as best as it can.
So some of the things you would have mentioned, you mentioned the menstruation cycle, you mentioned fibroids, you talked about PCOS and fertility. One of the things from, I guess, a metabolic standpoint that we should focus on is when we're eating our food, how am I going to eat to help my blood sugar to remain balanced? Blood sugar balance goes beyond type 2 diabetes. Some persons have issues with blood sugar regulation and never be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, but it's impacting their risk of PCOS, it's impacting their fibroid growth, it's impacting their menstruation cycle. And so we want to be focusing on foods and nutrients such as things that are going to be good sources of omega-3 fats. Omega-3 fats is going to help to reduce inflammation. All of those health problems that you would have mentioned have an aspect of excess inflammation. So omega-3 fats are going to come from things like ground flax seeds, chia seeds, salmon, sardines, from the supplements. We also want to look at how we can balance our blood sugar through eating whole grains, whether it's quinoa, brown rice, eating higher fiber carbohydrates, orange sweet potato, having some beans in our plate. Add some little bit rinsed beans to your salad, including some fermented foods if possible. Adding some Greek yogurt. These things can help with estrogen balance, help to reduce inflammation, while we're limiting the offenders: too much added sugars, too much trans fat, too much alcohol, too much caffeine.
Is there any major difference between that and for men, like what nutrients or foods best support male reproductive health? Or is it pretty much a similar approach to what you should take more of and what you should avoid?
It's a similar approach, but you take more of and what you should avoid, just ensuring that for the men, you put an emphasis on the zinc and ensuring that they're getting their pumpkin seeds and nuts and legumes in addition to the protein sources.
Yeah. I think what's helpful here too, for parents is when you talk about reproductive, obviously you're thinking in the space of speaking to adults as adults. But I also think it's important for parents who have young kids to understand that it's good to start those healthy habits early, because it will make life easier in the long run if you already developed a habit of eating properly and getting. So like I know we started adding flaxseed to like oats for our kids, and to the Greek yogurt. Like my son loves Greek yogurt with some banana and some cinnamon and some flaxseed, and then it's like you get them into this habit of good things, putting good things in their body from early on, so they get used to it, rather than you jump to a bag of chips or a Snickers bar, things like that, which tend to lead in the opposite directions. I imagine that's the things like trans fats and over processed foods and things like that. So taking one more in this reproductive space, couples who are actively trying to conceive, how should they think about meals, caffeine, alcohol, supplements, how all of those kind of play a role in, I guess, making it easier or harder to conceive?
So meal timing is an interesting concept. We don't necessarily talk about meal timing often when we're talking about reproductive health, but it is important, especially for women who have history or challenges with conceiving, issues with PCOS, extra weight. Is indicative of insulin resistance. So with meal timing, you want to look at maybe eat between 8 to 10 hours a day. That works well with helping to balance our hormones. But there are differences for other individuals, so guidance is important, especially if you're on medications. When it comes to caffeine is a stimulant. There are recommendations to limit caffeine when a person is trying to become pregnant, a woman want to conceive, or even if they are pregnant. And so one tip I would give my patients would be to cut off caffeine at 12 p.m. It just gives the body an opportunity to break down the caffeine with enough hours before you go to sleep. So it may not be an exact amount of caffeine, but it helps to reduce the intake if you're going to stop at 12 p.m. Another thing you think about is, we mentioned those supplements, getting those prenatal supplements, and for the men, getting additional supplementation such as vitamin C to help with reduction of inflammation. And of course, again, limiting and avoiding excess alcohol will all help both couples or each person in the partner to help with a healthy conception.
Boy, you probably made a lot of people upset. I know a lot of people who have that 2-3 o'clock coffee habit. They'll have 2 or 3 cups a day, and they'll have that second or third one around 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon. So that 12 o'clock is going to be interesting for people. But obviously, it is helpful in terms of having that as much of it flush out of your system before evening and into nighttime. So let's move forward and let's look at helpful versus harmful in terms of what we consume and what has positive impacts on our hormones and what have negative impacts on our hormones. So what foods have the strongest positive impact on hormonal health from you as the expert?
Okay, great. And so I'm just going to run through a few. Take your notes, get your pen and paper. So I would have mentioned before omega-3 foods or foods that contain omega-3 fats. So ground flax seeds, chia seeds, salmon, sardines, and the supplements. There's a category of vegetables called cruciferous vegetables. So it's not just eat your vegetables. Eat vegetables that include cruciferous vegetables. Broccoli, cauliflower, kale, Brussels sprouts, and cabbage. Getting some sources of magnesium from whole grains, nuts, seeds, legumes. We want to get sufficient iodine. Be careful with taking an iodine supplement because it could lead to iodine toxicity. But if you're taking a regular multivitamin, if you're using iodized salt sparingly, if you're including some seaweed like nori or Irish moss in your diet and eating seafood at times, then you're going to get adequate iodine. Getting good sources of fiber from your carbohydrate sources, not too much refined flour, but some pumpkins and quinoa, wild rice, whole grain brown rice, and selenium. Selenium is important, getting from Brazil nuts, legumes, nuts, and seeds, animal protein. These are good sources of things to have.
Yeah. And so obviously the flip side of that is, which foods most disrupt hormone health. And I feel like if anybody's been listening to this point, they're going to have an idea of what you're about to say.
Right, and so I start from the gut. So if it's going to disrupt the good bacteria in your intestines, it's going to disrupt the hormone health. So what disrupts that? Too much sugar, whether it's inside the beverages and the food. So sugar-sweetened foods, highly refined carbohydrates, fast foods, high-fat foods, too much alcohol, too much ultra-processed snacks, a diet high in inflammatory foods like those mentioned, too much meat. All these things can affect hormonal health.
Okay. And then lastly in this section, people, if they have done any research or any listened to any other podcasts, any health shows, one of the things that they probably would have heard of is this concept of endocrine disruptors. And so we know that there are things like additives and even sometimes packaging of our foods that are problematic when it comes to disrupting our endocrine system. So what foods or types of packaging or additives should we avoid or watch out for? And I guess in the spaces where there are things that we can swap out, what can we swap out for a better, whether it be a package or an alternative for the additives? Because I know a lot of times that comes into the preservative space.
So endocrine disruptors are chemicals that interfere with our hormones. So our hormones are being released from endocrine glands. So things that can disrupt the process or the activity of the hormone, either prevent it, mimic it, block it, alter it. Examples like BPA, bisphenol A, that's found in many cans and plastics. So we can read some cans or plastics or avoid them if we want to reduce that exposure, and perhaps use stainless steel and glass packaging instead to reduce that exposure of BPA. We also want to think about how the food is grown and raised. So food has additives and such as pesticides and different hormones are added to the animals. And so sometimes we can't shop for organic because it's more expensive, but we can shop locally. Food that's grown locally will have less of those endocrine disruptors because it has less of those chemicals added that we don't necessarily add for shelf life. So shopping locally, growing your food, buying a few items organic if possible, peeling some of the skins off of the food or the vegetables or fruits if they're not organic. And if you want to go deeper, look at the Dirty Dozen. They talk about certain ones to avoid, like berries and greens and things like that. Maybe got some organic ones. But I would say once you eat a high fiber diet, the fiber in the foods are going to help with excretion. The fiber is going to help with absorbing some of the extra chemicals on the food, and you will defecate it out, stool it out in the toilet, down into the sewer, in the cesspit. And so a high fiber diet is also helpful with minimizing the impact of endocrine disruptors.
What about like the veggie rinse? Because I know that's something that I've seen people. It's like a spray that you use to help clean when you get vegetables and fruits from the store. Is that something that you would recommend? Is that helpful?
Yeah, so if we have access to washes that can help to clean the vegetables and the fruit, definitely that will help with reducing the exposure of the chemicals and residues and the pesticides. You can also clean it yourself. Maybe you can put some vinegar in the water. Some person, they put a little bit of cleaning dish detergent
Not
to
bleach.
help not bleach, right? To clean it off and rinse it off, and anything that you can do to help reduce what is actually on the surface of the fruits and vegetables will help you. Yes.
Yeah. It's also a good place to plug like the farmers markets. I know there's a number of local farmers markets that happen across the island. And I think across the country as well. So there's obviously the one on Gladstone Road. I think there's one on Village Road that happens, if not every Saturday, on a particular rotation. So, that's a good place too to look into it. Even if you feel like the food stores have them too expensive, you have those options as well to get your natural, locally grown produce. So that's always helpful as well. So, diet is a lifestyle factor. It's a part of how lifestyle impacts our day-to-day life. So we want to look at some other lifestyle factors that can also assist in, or modify our diet hormone links. So how do things like stress and and cortisol interact with food choices and blood sugar? And then what eating strategies can blunt the effect of stress? Because so many people are working, late hours or working 2 jobs. They are managing, work and outside projects and family and all of these things. And a lot of that comes with a lot of stress. So, is there anything that we can do in our eating habits to mitigate the effects of stress on our hormones?
When we think about stress and hormones, as you mentioned, cortisol is the one that primarily is spoken of. So cortisol is a stress hormone, and we do need some cortisol, but we don't need excessive amounts of cortisol or to be elevated for a long period of time, because excess cortisol will lead to insulin resistance, increased risk of type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, just a poor quality of life. And one of the things that we can do to minimize the impact of stress is to, when we realize that we are stressed, to mentally try to avoid the comfort foods, the sugary foods, because that will exacerbate the problem that's actually happening with the high cortisol levels anyway. The high stress will increase cortisol, it will increase insulin, they're eating sugary foods, comfort foods, and now we're just exacerbating the issue even further. So what the solution is? The solution is we want to intentionally include protein and fiber at every meal before the stress happens. While the stress is happening, we can say, what, if I eat sufficient protein and fiber, when or if I do become stressed, the impact of this stress or cortisol or insulin will be lessened, because the protein and the fiber will slow down the increase of blood sugar. And we may not be understanding how that works, but it's going to help. So ensure we're having protein and fiber at all of our meals. We're planning and balancing our diet and limiting caffeine, because caffeine will increase the cortisol stress hormone. So while we may feel as if we don't have stress, our body is under stress because of the amount of caffeine that we have consumed.
Boy, you really rubbing the coffee drinkers wrong today. My God. All right, so let's look at sleep then. How does poor sleep or poor sleep habits alter our hunger hormones and cravings? How does, because I know people talk about a lot of times like how you eat and what you eat in the evening and how late you eat. So how does all that play together in terms of the connection between sleep, diet, and our hormonal health?
Sleep, diet, and hormonal health. If we get insufficient sleep, it will cause an imbalance in our hormones. For example, our ghrelin hormone, the hormone that makes you feel hungrier, it will increase. Why? Because if you are getting insufficient sleep, you need more energy. And where does energy come from? From food. And so if you're not getting enough sleep, we're going to be having a higher appetite full of calorie-rich foods that are high in sugars and high in fat. It's also going to dampen the leptin hormone that should be telling you to stop eating because you have lack of sleep. So sleep affects your appetite and your cravings. So a tip for improving your diet: before you go to bed, don't eat 3 hours before. So a cutoff time. So if your bedtime is 10 o'clock, which it should, then you stop eating by 7, and that is going to help to promote good sleep. Also, you want to have a light meal before you go to bed. The heaviest meal should not be before bedtime. The heaviest meal should be earlier in the day, and focus on foods that are going to be lower in glycemic index, has some fiber, has some protein inside it, and also foods that contain melatonin. Melatonin is a hormone that helps with sleep. So add some nuts to your salad, or put some mushrooms in your vegetable stir fry. Have some cherries. These things are important. And again, cut off the caffeine at 12 p.m.
Awesome. Hydration. Now, this is that I know so many people who just don't drink enough water. But what is the hormone case for plain water and electrolytes? Because, people will say, well, I drink my coffee, or I drink my tea and there's water in that, or I eat, watermelon, or I have lettuce and so I'm getting my water supply. What is the case for drinking regular water and electrolytes?
When we think about water, first we need to know how much water do we need. So go on the scale, weigh yourself. If you're 150 pounds or any pounds, divided by 2, and that's the number of ounces of water. So a 150-pound person needs 75 ounces of water. How does this impact hormonal health? If we are dehydrated, this increases the stress in our body, so our cortisol levels will increase. It will decrease the good feel hormones, so hormones that give us good feeling in our mood. So serotonin will decrease, so our mood will be impacted if we're dehydrated. If we're dehydrated, it will also disrupt our metabolism in general, our electrolyte balance, and our ability to release and detoxify harmful chemicals. So the electrolytes that we want to be consuming, foods and beverages that are going to be good sources of potassium, sodium, magnesium, calcium, phosphorus, and chloride. We are good with the sodium and the chloride, that's all. But where we need help with is getting more potassium. So that could be in sources such as melons, cantaloupe, honeydew, from coconut water, just fruits and vegetables in general. Magnesium can come from beans, nuts and seeds, whole grains, and calcium beyond the milk products, dark green leafy vegetables, kale, broccoli, as well as almonds are good sources for those for that type of electrolyte.
Awesome. I think we mentioned this a little bit earlier in a different part of the conversation on meal timing, but I want to take it in a slightly different direction. What are your thoughts on regular meals versus intermittent fasting, especially when it comes to things specifically like hormonal balance? And are there people who should avoid fasting because of any particular condition that they may have?
Intermittent fasting is a hot topic, and when patients come to the clinic and they see me at Oaktree Medical Center, intermittent fasting often comes up. And so I try to avoid using the term intermittent fasting because there's so much variety, but I focus on the number of hours. So if you're coming to me, you're talking about, should I eat 8 hours a day or 10 hours, then that's a conversation of intermittent fasting I'm referring to today. And so definitely eating between 8 to 10 hours can have an improvement on your hormonal health, particularly as it relates to preventing or helping to treat insulin resistance. And so you can get your regular quote unquote 3 meals in between 8 to 10 hours. I think the problem comes into when we're eating too late and we're eating like 16, 20 hours a day. Now intermittent fasting is a cool thing, but we should not have been doing that in the first place. So that is an aspect of meal timing there. In terms of caution, there are persons who you want to be careful with limiting the hours. Maybe some persons cannot eat as short of a window of 8 hours because maybe they're a child, they're insulin, they're pregnant, they have a history of disordered eating. We wouldn't want to be encouraging that for everybody. So make sure you see a registered dietitian to ensure that you have the appropriate meal timing for you.
Okay. And then the last question in this section is about portion sizes and protein distribution. So through a lot of our conversation, you've indicated having an appropriate amount of protein, having protein, whether it's from a meat, an animal source, or a plant source, like nuts and beans and things like that. But, how do portion size and protein distribution influence things like our insulin, our satiety, and I guess muscle supporting hormones as well?
Great question. So, insulin, satiety, muscle supporting hormones. When we talk about portion control or portion sizes, first of all, we know that everybody needs a different amount because they have a different age, different gender, different activity level, etc. But beyond that, we want to be getting at least 50% of our meal from non-starchy vegetables. How is this going to help our hormones? It's going to have a great source of fiber in it, and that fiber is going to promote good satiety. It's going to promote the production of GLP-1. Make sure we have enough leptin, not too much ghrelin. Make sure our blood sugar doesn't rise, so the insulin level doesn't go too high because of high blood sugar levels. Also including protein, spreading protein throughout the day, having a protein source at every meal. Plant sources of protein would include major sources, nuts, seeds, peas, legumes, beans. Animal sources of protein, egg, fish, poultry, seafood, etc. So having the protein there as well is important in terms of hormonal health. So a balanced plate, mostly non-starchy vegetables, some protein, and a controlled amount of carbohydrates.
Okay. Now we're gonna go into some practical guidance for us as Bahamians, right? There's we know that there's some things that we like to eat, and sometimes we like to have 2 and 3 meats on a Sunday, or we want to have like peas and rice with plantain, with potato salad, with right? So for what we would consider a typical Bahamian diet, like what are some easy tweaks that people can make to make it more hormone friendly?
So a typical diet, you say, what's the Bahamian diet? Peas and rice, macaroni, potato salad, coleslaw, plantain. And for real, like everybody says it in the same order. I mean,
Yes.
I don't know, it's just something. So when I teach patients about meal planning, I help them to identify where does it fall in terms of the food groups. Okay, what is the protein? What is the starch? What is the non-starchy vegetable? What is the fruit? And when we can identify that, then we can improve this plate. So we have peas and rice, plantain, macaroni, potato salad, all of those, and corn. All of those are starches. So we can get our plate and put a quarter of that. Just choose of those, what is going to be a quarter of a plate that's going to help you? Yes, you may decide to boil your plantain rather than fry your plantain. That is a choice. But the quantity is where we are falling in terms of most problems on the Bahamian plate. And when it comes to the protein, yes, we want to maybe avoid frying it so much, avoid the barbecue sauce too often, and reduce the size to a quarter of the plate, and ensure that we have something on the other side of the plate, some steamed cabbage, some boiled frozen mixed vegetables, lettuce and tomatoes. But I think the first step is identifying, is it a protein? Okay, quarter plate. Is it a starch? Okay, quarter plate. Is it a non-starchy vegetable? Oh, I don't have that. Let me get that. And add that to the plate on the next half, and that's the first place to start.
We'll do that thing where we'll have the whole plate with everything listed, and then have like this tiny bit of salad kick on the side. They'll be like, well, at least I eaten salad. Or, well, I had coleslaw, but then it's like, you think about coleslaw, it might have mayo and all these other things in it as well. So it's kind of, it's not the same, it's not as healthy. So that portioning obviously is very important. So again, just thinking very practically through it, what would a sample hormone steady day of eating look like? Like breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks. What would you recommend? Just for an average person.
Okay, so for an average person, we want to take off the box, making sure we're going to get our fiber, our protein, our low glycemic index, carbohydrates, some antioxidants. So once we have that in our mind, making sure we're getting some zinc and everything, then we can start planning. So I will mention a plant-based meal, and then mention the swaps for persons who want to consume animal products. Sure. So let's say a breakfast. So a breakfast item, if we have oatmeal, some unsalted nuts, some berries, and unsweetened almond milk, we're going to be getting foods that are going to be lower on the glycemic index. We're going to have some sources of zinc and magnesium and other minerals, and the antioxidants from the berries. That's a meal that can be consumed by all persons. For a lunch meal, if we have lettuce and tomatoes, we can beef that up by adding some pumpkin seeds for the extra zinc, which is good for hormonal balance, particularly for men. If you're a person plant-based, maybe some curry chickpea stew, some quinoa, have a fruit that's plum, or swap that curry chickpea stew for curry chicken. For dinner, we can have our broccoli medley. Those crucifers vegetables are very good for hormonal health. Boiled pumpkin, the high fiber and the antioxidants in the pumpkin is good for hormonal health. For protein, maybe black bean burger. For plant plant-based, or some salmon for persons who want to eat animal protein, and have a fruit on the side. That is a good sample meal plan. Put on repeat and you'll be good.
Okay. And then smart grocery list. What would be your top 10 pantry or fridge staples for maintaining hormonal health on a budget?
So we want fruit, so whether it's apples, tangerines, plums, or berries. Vegetables, primarily romaine lettuce, spinach, so maybe broccoli, cabbage. Get some nuts, we have peanuts, almonds, walnuts, some seeds, pumpkin seeds, ground flax seeds, chia seeds, carbohydrates, yam, sweet potato, corn, quinoa, brown rice, and getting our protein, legumes, fish, and poultry.
Awesome. That was fast. All right. And then eating out locally. So obviously we know that food is culturally important. We know that it's very communal, right? So people will go out to celebrate birthdays, graduations, all kind of different special events. What are some things that people should be looking out for when they go out to eat at a restaurant? Maybe some red flags on a menu, or things that they should consider swapping when they go out to eat. Especially, like I said, we do so much community around eating.
In the Bahamas, we like to eat fries. We like things in the bag, right? Everything goes in the bag. So some things that we can do, if there is an option, you can swap the fries with a baked potato. We can swap the fries with some lettuce and tomatoes, a salad. If we have rice, and we want to have rice, but not so much rice, we can ask to maybe reduce the rice or swap the rice for extra side of vegetables, rather than getting the sodas all the time and the juices or the iced tea. Maybe ask for a water instead. So these are some practical things we can start off. 3 things: fries, swap it with baked potatoes or a salad; soda, get some water; rice, extra size of vegetables instead, or reduce amount of rice.
Okay. We have a section for special topics. I'm just going to pick one. I know we talked a lot about fats and trans fats, and I know oil then becomes a big part of that conversation as well. So seed oils, coconut oil, butter. How should our listeners think about the different options for fat and how it impacts their hormones?
First of all, we want to think about, is this fat processed or is it a whole food fat? A whole food fat means that did it come right off the farm? So we want to emphasize those. So avocados, nuts, seeds, and olives will be the priority. Flax seeds, chia seeds, in terms of getting fat. For fats that are more slightly processed, getting refined or unrefined, cold pressed coconut oil, olive oil would be better choices than getting regular seeds oil or using too much butter.
Okay, fair enough. So Lord knows we like some butter. All right. So as we wrap up, 2 final questions for you. For someone who may be going through their annual or their regular doctor visit, what are some labs or symptoms that, if they come across it in that process, that would warrant them needing to come and see you for a workup from the dietitian?
So some of the symptoms that could indicate hormonal imbalances would be weight changes. If you're gaining a lot of weight or you're losing a lot of weight, that could be a thyroid issue. If you're having issues with fatigue, skin issues, acne, dryness, hair changes, excess loss of hair, or excessive growth, or reproductive problems, your period is irregular, low libido, infertility, these may be hormonal. So you need to go and see a physician to get a workup. They may be testing things like your thyroid panel, testosterone, fasting glucose, insulin, lipid panel, iron studies, and vitamin D. And always ensure that you interpret those results with a qualified medical professional. A registered dietitian or certified nutrition specialist is also important to help to interpret those labs and the medical diagnosis and prescriptions from a nutritional perspective to help to set you up on a plan that suits your needs.
Awesome. And then our last question for today: if a listener can only change 3 things this week in particular to support their hormonal health, what should they be?
The 3 things: 1, we want to reduce high glycemic foods and beverages. So these are refined carbohydrates, and choose higher fiber choices. 2, you want to reduce the intake of sugar-sweetened beverages or sugary foods and replace the sugar-sweetened beverage with at least some water and a serving of fruit. And you want to reduce your trans fat and saturated fats by eating more unsaturated fats and omega-3 fats like avocados, nuts, seeds, salmon, and flax seeds.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is a very informative episode. I think we packed a whole lot of information in about 53 minutes. This is really, really, really well done. Thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us and give our audience some much needed advice on how to manage their hormonal health through their eating habits and their diet.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Burrows.
Awesome. So that was Eating for Hormonal Health with dietitian Shanishka Cambridge, who is the dietitian director at Oaktree Medical Center. If this conversation helped you, please follow or subscribe or leave a quick response and share it with someone who's building healthier habits. Until next time, stay informed, stay connected, stay well, and stay tuned for the next Vital Voice.
We'd like to thank today's sponsors, Oaktree Medical Center and Wellspring Lifestyle Group.
Are you enjoying Vital Voices? Do you find our conversations educational, engaging, and inspiring? Then like, subscribe, and tap that notification bell to keep updated on new episodes and more.
Vital Voices.